Java is an object-oriented programming language. You can't get very far in Java without having at least a basic understanding of what an object-oriented programming language is and how classes and objects work. So this chapter is an overview and introduction to working with classes and objects. And in this lesson, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what object-oriented programming is and what classes and objects are. So let's get started. An object-oriented program is a collection of loosely connected objects interacting with each other. For example, in a payroll program, you have a set of employees. Each one of those employees is an object, and you have a payroll, which is itself an object. You can also have other objects in the program as well, such as a timesheet, or the number of hours worked could be an object, although it's usually just a piece of data. But you get the idea. And those objects interact with each other even though they are defined independently. An object, or a class, encapsulates state and behavior. When we talk about state, we're talking about data. And when we talk about behavior, we're talking about the operations that that object can perform using either the data that's inside the object or outside data as well. A class defines an object's behavior. So we create a class so that we can define exactly what an object does. Once we create a class, then we can create individual objects of that class. So for example, in a payroll program, we'll have one employee class, but many employee objects, all of the employees that are going to get paid within that payroll. For all intents and purposes, a class can be viewed as a user-defined type. So even though Java does not have a built-in type for employee, we can create one in Java by defining an employee class. Classes can be linked to each other using a hierarchical structure. So for example, if I have a top-level class, sometimes called a superclass, of employee, then underneath that employee class, I could have an hourly employee class and a manager class that inherit the characteristics or the common characteristics of the employee class. So for example, both an hourly employee and a manager have a name and a date of hire. But an hourly employee will have one salary structure and a manager will have a different salary structure. So the hourly employee and the manager can inherit those characteristics that are common, and then it can have their own definitions for those characteristics that are distinct. Classes higher up in the structure can pass state and behavior to lower classes, which is pretty much what inheritance means, is that I can take the characteristics of an employee and pass those down to lower level classes such as an hourly employee or a manager. An object-oriented program is a collection of objects where each object has its own set of responsibilities. That's what makes object-oriented programming such a great tool for managing large complex programs, because with each object I can concentrate on its responsibilities rather than have to worry about all the objects at once. So each object can be defined independently and then brought together to create a more complex whole. Objects form the basis of reusable software, since an object can be used in any program that needs the object. So for example, I have an employee object that I use in my payroll program that I can also use in a project management program or a human resources program or any other program that my company has to write that involves working with employee objects. This lesson was meant only to cover the very basic concepts of classes and objects and object-oriented programming. The rest of the chapter will involve actually creating our own classes to see how it's done and begin to get a better idea of how Java works as an object-oriented programming language. So in the next lesson, we'll begin by learning how to define a class.